I'd like to thank you, Dr. Gallo and Tara, for your kind invitation to speak today. I'm very honored and excited to be invited to deliver today the Dr. Terrence O'Grady lectureship. It really pleases me greatly that your department supports such a lectureship to highlight dermatology education, among other things, certainly unique in the U.S. It's a privilege to be here. I am going to try and start sharing my screen to begin. And are you currently able to see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so today I want to talk about the transformations of dermatology assessment in America. I just need to start my own self-timer here to stay on track. I do have disclosures, not so much financial, but I am a little bit biased in the committees that I serve. I am vice president currently for another couple of months on the American Board of Dermatology and chairman of the ACGME Dermatology Review Committee, as Tara mentioned. They're both volunteer, unpaid, but a lot of the work I'm going to talk about stems from these two things. First, to just talk about I love double entendres, and the title of my talk is Proud Flesh, and that's exuberant healing reaction after wounding. You typically think about this in the equine world. It's usually excessive granulation tissue that occurs in injured horses. But I think that by the end of the talk, I hope that you'll see the exuberant reaction to healing. This is where I work, and it's far different than San Diego. This is Marshfield Clinic Health System. There are 70 Marshfield Clinic Health System locations serving rural healthcare in central and northwestern Wisconsin. And this is really the purpose of the mission of the Marshfield Clinic is to be a leader in the nation of rural healthcare. A little bit about my timeline in dermatology education. I grew up in a small town in southwest Missouri called Nevada, spelled like Nevada. And then after high school, went on to the University of Missouri in Columbia, where I was studying mechanical engineering. I was very naive in my life at that point, thinking that what I wanted to do was actually bionics. I wanted to make bionic eyes and ears and legs and arms. And Missouri didn't have a program at the University of Missouri for that, but I thought, well, I would go to medical school and finish my engineering degree and figure out how do you combine all this stuff. So very naive, but definitely helped in my pathway. In 1994, I began medical school and was part of the second class of an innovative problem-based learning curriculum where the learning was all in small groups. And I really, really love that because when you're an engineer, you don't have much like leeway for extra stuff like biological sciences. So I wasn't really entrenched in the biology world. And really the problem-based learning was a way to really engage with that. And then when I transitioned to residency, which was through a rural track here at Marshfield Clinic Health System through the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. That was a similar feeling that I got when I transitioned from engineering to medicine, was much like how I felt going from medical school to derm residency, as most of us have probably had those feelings where it's like, geez, you know, there's a whole new language, a whole new way of thinking, and many of us had very little dermatology as part of our curriculum. And so I thought I really, really found the problem-based learning style to be great for a novice thinker in medicine. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to have a novice medical student entering a new field of dermatology. And that's where I created my first curriculum design that sort of launched my education career, and that was the Dermatology Integrative Competency curriculum. And this was a fully immersed 140 case problem-based learning curriculum for dermatology residency, taking some of the things that were published on, well, what should you cover in a dermatology residency, and turning it into case-based learning. And it was a lot of work, and I really enjoyed doing that, and then eventually delivering it when I became an actual educator after residency. But if you haven't learned anything about the way things work in the world by now, I'll tell you, even when you have great innovative ideas, you get nowhere alone in this world. You really got to have help along the way. And it was July 2003, the end of my first year as a faculty member, where I was really wanting to expand this and make this a nationwide available curriculum, that Jeff Callan was visiting Marshfield Clinic as a visiting professor giving a grand rounds. And I took a chance, and I said, you know, Dr. Callan, would you be willing to just meet with me? I've got some education ideas. At the time, he was very engaged in dermatology education, and I just wanted to pick his brain as somebody farther along in a career path and connectedness than I was. And I sat down with him and talked to him for about 30 minutes, just kind of pitching. It was like the Shark Tank, you know, and just giving him these ideas. And to this day, I don't really know if he thought that it was a good idea or not. But I do know that he could sense an enthusiasm and passion for teaching. And I think he liked that, and really gave me some great advice in the moment. And one was about the education-based grants that are available for dermatologists with good ideas, both the Sulzberger Institute grant and the PICMED grant that were through the American Academy of Dermatology at the time. And that really helped to launch this and make it a computer-based, web-based curriculum. Now that also began an involvement with the AAD through the educational times in 2006, a couple years later, after some time on some task forces, work groups, really grinding out some good work product in the educational circles in those various task forces. I became in 2006 the vice chairman, and the next year the chairman of the Council on Education for the AAD. And that was from 2006 to 2011. And that was probably one of the busiest times in my career for volunteerism activities with involving derm education. And now the AAD, because some people, you know, they still get confused. What's the AAD versus what's the ABD? But the AAD is really the educational response arm of dermatology education requirements. And to this point, that really meant one thing, and that meant CME. So we were always trying to, you know, come up with new and innovative ideas for delivering required CME education that dermatologists needed. But in 2006, my involvement was hitting right at a time that there was a new kid on the block in the world of derm education, and that was maintenance of certification. And maintenance of certification was one of those paradigm shifting things in education where there were suddenly a whole lot of new things that dermatologists that were done with residency had to do in order to maintain board certified status. Now, during this time, I spent a lot of time in rooms like this that were conference tables, work groups, committee work, trying to come up with educational products. And we came up with a lot of different things to meet the needs, the requirements of MOC for our AAD members that needed board certification to maintain their status. So we created things like this, the MOCMD, which is it's a board style question with explanations. We did some live assessment where we inserted live audience response system sessions into academy meetings. Both the annual and summer meetings had more and more and more of these offerings each time. There were things like the AAD CME transcript, which is a member benefit where you can log all of the CME activities and the MOC activities, which really came about so that there could be an easy sharing of everything that you were doing to the American Board of Dermatology to prove that you had met the requirements of CME and MOC. There was a patient safety requirement as part of MOC, and I created a patient safety module, which was a very lengthy set of learning modules that were relevant to dermatology patient safety specifically, as most of the things that were available were very hospital-based patient safety modules. And so we made one for dermatology. There were also quality improvement activities that were created during this time as well, called the CPAT modules, which were chart abstraction-based modules that were for dermatologists to do chart reviews on common diseases like acne, melanoma, psoriasis, and to see if there were any gaps in care in their local population. There were also surveys, patient surveys, peer surveys of how am I doing. And then of course there was the stressful exam. There was derm exam prep courses that we put together during this time as well, to try and help people feel more comfortable and more prepared to take the MOC exam. All of this went by, and by the end of it, truly, I mean, it was an exhausting amount of work, but satisfying work, because at the end, I thought there was a lot of good educational activities that were created to try and help meet these needs. In 2011, as I rotated off that, late in the year in November, I received a phone call, and it was Tony Hood, and I had worked to write questions for the board, much like Tara does now, and does a great job at it, by the way. And the call came forward from Tony Hood, who said, you know, you've done a great job for the board writing questions, but we've also really been following your career trajectory in education and dermatology, and it's really something we'd like for you to become a part of the American Board of Dermatology. Is that something you'd be interested in? And of course, it was something I was very interested in. It was definitely a career goal to someday serve the American Board of Dermatology, and I said yes. And this was a fine group of people in my first year on the American Board of Dermatology, and we spent our time really working feverishly on the MOC movement, which was the mothership of the ABD is the ABMS, and MOC was their baby, and we were playing by their rules. And you know, we found it to be a very challenging process, because there was a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion, and a lot of ignorance, quite frankly, about MOC among the dermatologist community. After a few years on the board, I was at the San Francisco annual meeting of the Academy in 2015. And there were some very, very dense clouds descending on the city as the dermatology meeting went on. And the cloud was a very, very intense anti-MOC movement. There were pens and posters and speeches and anger, and really kind of a pretty major bucking of MOC among practicing dermatologists. Now, that caused us at the American Board of Dermatology to say, enough is enough. We've really got to get a handle on what's wrong and make it better. So why was the outcry? What was the gorilla in the room? And there were several. One of the messages was, you know, we think traditional CME should be adequate. If we are done with our board certification, all we should do is go to our meetings and claim our CME. MOC is too expensive. It takes too much time. It's not relevant to my practice. You stress us out with your high stakes examination, and you should really take a testing opportunity to teach us to raise all ships in the harbor rather than to pass us or fail us, because that's stressful. To deal just briefly with the first concern, you know, there was a Cochran review in '99 and again in 2015 with an update that basically concluded the same thing. And that is from 39 systematic reviews, traditional lecture-based didactics don't do anything to change physician practice or improve patient outcomes. They're fun. You have a nice time visiting with friends. You can catch up on your email if the speech is boring. But the truth is, traditional lecture-based didactics don't change anything. So that one we had to just kind of set aside and not really address. But the others we really wanted to take a pause, circle the wagons, and go back to the drawing board. So for that year, 2015 through 2016, we put a pause on the maintenance of certification requirements. So no one lost certification for failing to meet MOC requirements in that time. And we really wanted to get at the heart of what was the problem. And we needed to, in order to fix it, we had to first focus on the value equation of MOC, and this is it. MOC should keep the dermatologist current. It should be simple. It should be enjoyable. It should not cost a lot of money, and it should not cost a lot of time. So those were that was the equation that led to our mantra that we needed to make it relevant, make it cheaper, make it time worthy, and make it more available. Disseminate opportunities more widespread. One of the issues that was going on is that many of the partners that we relied on to deliver the education were often using it as a profit center to try and charge some pretty significant dollars to attend to earn any of this MOC credit. The first thing that we did as an outcrop of this, in addition to putting a pause on the requirements while we were working to fix, I work with Clark Otley, who is a very talented Mohs surgeon and a wonderful leader in dermatology. And together we created a once a week on the fly set of questions that were individual questions that you could take on the fly that also had an explanation of why is the right answer right, why are the wrong answers wrong, that was meant to be delivered one at a time through an email or web-based service. And this was based on the American Board of Anesthesiology's MOCA Minute, which was fairly popular among anesthesiologists. And we said, we can do this for derm, and we did it. And we did what few people would do after the hard work that was involved with that. The American Board of Dermatology gave that year's worth of content for free to the American Academy of Dermatology and said, you can have this content, but we want you to deliver it as a member benefit. And this is what you now know, hopefully a lot of you know, as the question of the week. That now is run no longer by the content is no longer created by the ABD, but the concept that was behind it is still living today through the AAD self-assessment question of the week. And this is where you get a short vignette with clinical photos, sometimes some paths, and you pick your answer. And then you find out, how did you do compared to the peers who took it? What were the distribution of answers? And then you can read about the questions. And not only do you get 1 point of MOC self-assessment credit, you also now get a quarter of a CME credit for every question that you answer. Well, this became wildly, wildly popular and actually is the most successful dermatology CME activity by credits claimed in the history of dermatology. If you look at the numbers, there are over 13,000 unique individuals who participate in Question of the Week with an average weekly participation of over 3,500. And the last time a bigger assessment was done, there were, as of 2019, over 600,000 self-assessment questions completed for a total of over 153,000 CME credits. And we'll talk in a minute about the time spent on each question, but it was under a minute. What's really also cool as an educator, and for those out there, there were a lot of knowledge gaps that were identified in this, things that, you look at and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that a third of the country didn't know that. And that's about what we get. It's 69.8% correct. And you can use the gaps in knowledge to feed planning of future CME activities, which I'm sure that the AAD now does. Now, remember the earlier complaint that MOC is too time consuming. Well, what we find is that if you do the napkin math, 55 seconds per week and you're required to answer 300 self-assessment questions in 10 years, that averages to 27 minutes and 30 seconds per year on average spent in self-assessment question answering. And the question is, board certification worth investing under 30 minutes per year in self-assessment? I would say yes. I would say yes. And we did a lot of dissemination of activities. We looked for opportunities to say, hey, you know what, your journal or your meeting or whatever is already doing this to some degree. You know, you're doing a good job. You should be tagging on some self-assessment credit to this particular activity. And what you can see is through those efforts of shepherding the MOC credit, we now have nearly 2 million total credits as of earlier this week, nearly 2 million total self-assessment credits that have been claimed, most of them through either your normal membership fee, your subscription service, or for free. So that was a big, big change. The next big change came in how we address the quality improvement activity. Now, I can be very critical of the AAD's initial quality improvement activity because I helped create it. And it was very new world to me. Quality improvement in 2006 wasn't something on the lips of every dermatologist. Most dermatologists who were asked to complete this were very unfamiliar. But what was being asked was, you know, first of all, you only had 4 or 5 modules you could pick from: melanoma, psoriasis, acne. If you didn't see those things, you were pretty much, you know, up a creek. But what the other thing was, you had to do 25 chart reviews, and each chart review had about 35 data points per module. And many times it wasn't even the elements that you were asked to log were not even areas that you were particularly worried about in your care. It was just a very, you know, broad abstraction of the chart, and then you would look for any kind of signals of care disparities. And so, you know, I worked again with my colleagues at the American Board of Dermatology, and I was placed in charge of fixing this. And so what was, Stan Miller is here pictured, and he said, you know, what we need from you is we need this quality improvement piece fixed. And so what we concluded was dermatologists don't need to perform such extensive chart abstraction. They don't have to be publication ready. We're not trying to do work that's published in the New England Journal of Medicine here. It's just trying to get people baby steps into the quality improvement process to start looking at what am I doing in practice. And we need to have a more varied amount of options selectable for any kind of practice type, whether you're a cosmetic dermatologist, a pediatric dermatologist, a dermatopathologist. Every one of us needs something that we can explore. So I put together a work group called the Focus Practice Improvement Module Work Group. And this is that group, a lot of great hardworking people. And if you're trying to get a start into the American Academy of Dermatology, American Board of Dermatology, or any, I'm going to tell you, because I know I got a lot of residents here, you don't start by being the chairman of something, okay? You need to start by being a good worker bee. And I can tell you that's how you ascend, is be a good worker bee and have good work product and meet deadlines, and you will ascend. And that's every one of these people is a great, great person at getting a good work product. And this is what the Focus Practice Improvement module is all about. You take a very, very narrow and targeted look at something, and you're looking only at one problem. And you summarize the literature that suggests that there's a problem with this particular issue. You read the very brief sets of paragraphs, you look at the key points, and then you look at your charts. We never have a person look at more than 5 charts, and we never ask more than 3 questions on a chart. And so it's very, very targeted. Did you do this? Did you look at that? And if there is an opportunity to improve, then you wait and repeat that process after you collect a few new patients with the intervention in mind. If you go through the process and you've done everything right on the baseline screen, you're done. You have confirmed that you're doing the best of what the best available evidence tells us that you should be doing, and you're done. You don't have to go find a new module. So how did this work for the diplomates? Remember, this was now launched right around 2017, right on the heels of the major anti-MOC movement. And at this time, 2016, and you can see over time how many diplomates have, how many exercises have been completed. There are 46 available exercises, and they're in all of these areas of study, including cosmetic dermatology, by the way. Now, this is just a list of the most popular from start. This isn't all 46, but just to give you an idea of some of the module topics. And the thing that I'm the proudest of is even when it's a very obscure topic, even when it's an obscure topic, there are still diplomates that will pick it. And so it's exciting to see that different people have different interests. And so we're trying to be as broad as we can possibly be. But the thing that I'm the proudest of are these stats. Coming out of a time when people were very irate, this is the satisfaction with the focus practice improvement, where you have 99% saying this activity is relevant to my practice. You have about a third of people, 25 to 30% of people saying, you know, I changed what I did because of what this brought for me to the table. Including some improved, self-reported patient outcomes. And I would recommend this project to a peer. If it was a real stinker, you know that would not be true. And this was off of some anonymous surveys, so it's not like we're hanging it over anybody's head of what they say. And what we were getting was some unsolicited feedback. You know, this is very relevant. We like this stuff, and that was always good. But what about the high stakes examination? That was a big concern. And this, just to give you the timeline on things, the first board exam was given in 1933. From 1933 to 1991, the post-residency testing was nothing. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to pass your first test and you were good for forever. Then came the time-limited certification era in 1991 until 2006, where you did nothing until 10 years had passed. So every 10 years, you had to pass a test. Then we entered what I have already talked about in 2006, the MOC era, where there were a lot of other things to do. And then soon we'll talk about the next era, which is the longitudinal testing era, which began earlier this year. And it was to get at some of these concerns, trying to solve some of the concerns. And this is where I want to talk about Certlink. This is a web-based longitudinal assessment platform where you're basically taking your maintenance of certification exam longitudinally, a couple of questions at a time. Now, how is it structured? It's structured to release you questions every quarter. And it releases 13 questions per quarter, and they're divided into 3 different types of questions. Every quarter, you get 6 core questions. You get 3 concentration, or now called elective questions, and you get 4 article-based questions, where you read an article first, and then you launch the question for that article. Now, if you look over the course of a year, if you get 13 questions a quarter, that's 52 questions a year. So it averages out about like a question a week. Now, you don't have to do a question a week. You can, gather them all up and answer all 13 of them in one sitting if you want, and then you're done for the rest of the quarter. But the idea is there should be frequent touches of your medical knowledge throughout time, and not just chunks of questions in 10-year blocks. I want to talk a little bit about the design. So what are core questions? This is always asked, what's the most likely diagnosis? And it shows you a common clinical photo of derm disease, just to see if, do you still have what it takes to recognize? And you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm a Mohs surgeon. I don't treat psoriasis. No, but you need to be able to still look at the patient with psoriasis. You were a general dermatologist before you were a Mohs surgeon. You should be able to still see psoriasis and know that that's that, or a suspicious mole for melanoma or whatever. So you answer the question in a board style way, what's the most likely diagnosis? What about the elective questions? The elective questions, one of the things I love about this is it lets you pick based on your area of interest, how much med derm, or how much derm path or peds derm or cosmetics do you want in your question pool? You get to select that. That's not selected for you. So you get to decide how much there is. And when you do this through the Certlink platform, you answer the question and it will tell you either you're right or you're wrong, but it also teaches you. It teaches you the why is the right answer right, and why are the wrong answers wrong, and what is the key point to know about this particular thing. Finally, article-based questions. At the beginning of every year, you select 8 articles that are published on the Certlink platform, put on there by the ABD and by journal editors of the participating journals that are believed to be the most practice-changing articles of the year. And you select 8 articles, and every quarter you're given 2 of the articles that you selected to read and then answer the questions about those. So you get to pick which of these articles that are posted do I want to read. So you get to pick which one's most relevant to me, or which one do I want to learn more about this. So it's not chosen for you, it's chosen by you. So that's an exciting part, and what I think will be a growing piece of the Certlink movement, because it's by far the very, very popular thing. Because remember, one of our keys was in the value equation, keep people current. Keep people current, and that certainly does. These are the journals that are participating in this. As you can see, a lot of the key upper crust journals in our field. Now, to answer the questions, you only have 10 minutes. Now, in the article-based question, that's not you have to read an article and answer a question in 10 minutes. You can read the article at your leisure. That has unlimited amount of time. You just have to do it within the quarter. But when you launch the question for the Certlink question, that you have 10 minutes. You're like, oh, that's so stressful, you know. But you can use anything that you want. You know, you can pull up the web and look for answers or whatever. Do a PubMed search if you feel you need to. Open up a textbook if that's how you do it. But you've got 10 minutes, and if that stresses you out, be reassured. This is a time, time to answer in our pilot phase of over 400 people, and you can see that the vast majority answer their question in the first minute, and very, very little answering is done after the first 5 minutes. Now, before submitting on Certlink, we ask you to rate your confidence in the relevance of the question, and how confident are you and how relevant are you? Now, I would tell you, I would avoid saying I'm not at all confident, because that question will come back to you later, because if they assume that the system is set up to consider that a guess, which means you don't know. So even if you get it right, you're going to get that question back again, hopefully with more confidence. So I would not ever mark not at all confident. Give yourself a little bit of credit. Be somewhat confident if you're not quite sure. And then relevance. And we use the relevance data to try and drill down into what kind of question is right. And if 90% of people are saying this question isn't relevant, well, then we let one sneak through that really needs to be yanked for future use. There's a dashboard that keeps you informed. This is my current dashboard here. I pulled it off yesterday. And there are some things to highlight. It's telling you what your current performance is, how many answers you've gotten right. It tells you how many days you have until either you're due with the current set of questions, or when your next questions will become available. And then it tells you how you're doing compared to the peers. And you know, I mean, this isn't to say, oh gosh, he must be a great dermatologist. I wrote the exam, you know, so I mean, of course it's going to, you know, be a high percentage for me, but more so look at the peers. This is, you know, a lot of thousands of dermatologists out there. These are not questions that are meant to be trippy. They're there to be more confirmatory that, you know what, I do know dermatology. Now, we all know that life happens, and you're probably sitting there in your chair and we say, geez, you know, I don't want to know. I don't really think I want to be taking tests every quarter for the rest of my career. And that's basically what it's designed to be. But we recognize that life happens, and we have inserted into Certlink an opt-out every year of every diplomate, no questions asked. If you want to take off a quarter, you can take off a quarter every year. And the actual denominator isn't going to be 52 questions. It's going to be 39 questions. Now, if you want to take all 4 quarters of questions, that's totally fine. But the system is going to drop your lowest performing quarter when calculating your performance. So that's another thing that's kind of helpful to know, that it's not like a forever and I've got no respite from taking test questions. But I can also tell you it doesn't take very long in your life to answer 13 questions a quarter. Now you're also probably saying, yeah, but what do I got to do to pass? And realize that this is not a normative testing. This is criterion based. So if everybody jumps over the low bar, everybody passes. It's not a set failure rate. What about teaching to competence? One of the great things about this, because remember that was one of the big requests of what was wrong with MOC. Every question that you miss in one quarter will be asked in a similar fashion, either a similar or an exact copy, one more time the next quarter. It's only the final time that you see the question that it gets counted as a score. So if you miss a question the first time you see it, there's no penalty for that. You'll get that question again. But if you miss it the second time, then it's going to be wrong. Wrong is wrong the second time around. So that is a breath of relief for a lot of people. Where are we with Certlink? What you see here is 68% of ABD certified dermatologists are participating in MOC right now. A lot of that other chunk is the people who were not time limited. So the people who certified before 1991. And of those participating in MOC, 59% are now enrolled in Certlink as of last week. And of those enrolled in Certlink, over 3/4 are actively participating in that. This ends the first year here in a couple weeks. Now, here's another good thing to highlight. 80 to 85% of people are basically saying, this is an upgrade, this is good, this is excellent, we're satisfied, this is much better, less stressful. It's helping me feel better about maintaining my certification and continuing in my certification journey. So although there's room to improve, I mean, it's not 100%, we've definitely come a long way from the anti-MOC buttons 5 years ago. Now, if you aren't on Certlink but would be interested, you can go to the abderm.org and click to enroll in Certlink. There's hot links that you can go to. We've got a few weeks left for the next launch that will happen January 2021. There's only 2 times a year that you can start into Certlink in January and July. And there's some deadlines. And the next deadline to sign up is November 15th to launch in January 2021. And so we look at how have we done with the concerns. I think we've lowered the cost. We've lowered the amount of time it takes. We have made our education relevant, and we have made a model that has a teach to competence model that's satisfying to the majority of people who are participating in it, allowing a second chance with the teach to competence testing model. Now, we take a breath, and what I say is at the same time that this was happening, there was a lot going on in resident education world as well, in the exact same 10 to 15-year overlap of time. Happening in dermatology residency education, the big thing when I began was we were just in 2001, the operationalizing of the ACGME competencies. And the competency movement, just to give you some perspective, in the 20th century model, so prior to the year 2000, it really was like you assessed residents by your gestalt, your gut feeling, and are they smart? And are they smart enough to pass their boards? Can they make diagnoses? And in the 21st century model, the competency said, well, yeah, that's important. Medical knowledge and being able to, pick right therapies and counsel the right therapies, on side effects and things like that are important. But there's a lot of soft skills of the way you communicate with patients or deal with difficult patients, or the professionalism involved of answering your pages or coming to work on time. And how you are looking to improve. All those things are important. And there are a lot of smart people that make lousy doctors, and that making just the right diagnosis is not really the end goal. It's just often the start. And so this launched a big degree of enthusiasm in me at the time, because I was also training director for a residency program at the time. And being a gearhead before I was in medicine, I really loved data. I mean, you know, Excel was my friend, let's just say. I really loved the data and really spent a lot of time in measurement of competence in a lot of different ways, whether it was patient care or medical knowledge or whatever. And we also had residency portfolios to help us measure some of those softer competencies of professionalism and communication that we didn't have. And in fact, the very beginning, the DICC, which, you know, I wanted to integrate the competencies as part of the name, is every discussion that we had was tagged on the back end so that any learner that was participating gets a transcript at the end of any case or at the end of their residency training that would log all of the different case discussions that they were deemed by the faculty facilitator to have participated in a competent discussion. So really exciting measurement period for me, but there were problems with the competencies. What we heard around the country, we don't know how to measure the soft competencies very well of objectively of professionalism and communication. We know what the competent resident looks like at the end of training, but we don't always know like when they're struggling or when to course correct, because, you know, is it just because they haven't had enough experience, or, you know, what does that first year resident look like, second year resident look like along that journey? And then residents were saying, you know, I only got good resident evaluations, et cetera, until bang, I was told I wasn't doing adequately near the end of my training. And, you know, had no idea before that things weren't going well. And then a lot of the measures were, you know, you're either competent or you're not yet competent. But what does that mean to the resident if they're just given not yet competent? That's a hard, you know, how do you act on that? What does that mean? What do I need to do? So the ACGME came up with a new initiative called Milestones Initiative. And when we talk about the milestones, we're talking about just like what you think of with like mile markers, et cetera, is like how much farther, where am I in this journey? And it's supposed to follow the individual's development trajectory across a range of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And this is kind of the measure. It's not a single line, it's a spread, because there's an acceptable performance variance with any kind of resident. And so that's what the milestones were for, was to kind of track this advancement as you go with a growing amount of competence. Now, being a guy that likes data, you know, I thought about how do I best show this in as few slides as possible to my resident or to my committees that I worked on. And I really like radar plots for this purpose. Every spoke of the wheel is a different subcompetency that we're trying to measure. And what you can see with the milestones, with radar plots with no competence in the center dot, and then full competence out on the outer edge, over time, if you make it a temporal measure, you can actually see the growth in competence towards a more perfect circle at the end of the fully competent, can't get any better kind of resident. And what we have is kind of over time this blooming flower, if you will, where we overlay how were you doing last time and the time before that and the time before that. And we just add the next set of competencies measures over the top of it to see how are you doing in each subcompetency area. And this can be helpful not only in watching a good resident or great resident blossom or bloom, but also it helps you identify maybe a struggling resident where they have a failure to progress or they actually have declining performance. And as you can see in this resident where the overlay is actually showing a lot of stuff from underneath. And this is an example of a resident that did not finish training in dermatology. They were not successful. Now, during this time, it became important to recreate tools to help people measure this path along the journey of becoming a competent dermatologist. And I spent a lot of time creating a set of 15 tools that I handed to the Association of Professors of Dermatology, which still live on there, but still need to be updated for Milestones 2.0, which I'll talk about in a second. This was a great time where there was a lot of like mapping of an evaluation, looking at something specific like how a resident communicates with a patient to the corresponding milestone, and was really helpful. To use as an objective measure to feed the milestone sub-competency performances that the clinical competency committees needed to create. Now, there were difficulties, and the difficulties with the Milestones 1.0 are shown here. I mean, there were adverbs of frequency were found throughout the milestones, and that's occasionally, consistently, usually, often. But oftentimes it was just a single measure of time that you were trying to measure, and so having a usually when it was an N of 1 is kind of tough to measure on most of these tools. The other thing is there was a lot of discontinuity of the milestone. So this created, as Tara mentioned in her intro, a second dermatology milestones group. I was involved in both groups in development, and the second milestone group is far more user-friendly. It's a lot more continuous in its train of thought. Level 5 is now more attainable, and I think a much more usable document. And we also reduced the number of milestones that educators had to assess. And so here we have those milestones. Next, I want to just talk, I have 2 more topics just to briefly talk about. One is evolution in resident testing. The resident assessment in 1969 to 2018, which is most of us who have been practicing for a while, it was an in-training exam, and it was a certifying exam, and that was it. And now, established in 2018, we've got the exam of the future, which is the exam of the present, which involves a basic exam, core exam, and applied exam. And I wanted to use this symbol here to kind of explain those new testing philosophies. So after a period of stepping up of residency education in dermatology, you take the basic exam. This is not an in-training exam like what you were used to in your training if you're a faculty member. The purpose of the basic exam is totally different. It's to identify the struggling first-year resident early in training so that there can be attention to try and correct some of those problems. The second part was the core exam, and there are 4 pillars of the core exam: medical derm, surg derm, pediatric derm, and dermatopathology. Now, this is what you remember as faculty from your certifying exam. The content of the core exam is exactly like the content of your core exam. It's trying to get at the same thing. The difference is, instead of going to Rosemont and sitting in an exam room for 2 days, taking 1 test at the end of training, residents now have 4 opportunities during their training to take and pass these 4 modules. They take it through a Pearson View Center or an at-home testing center. And the purpose of this is to assess that the resident has the core derm knowledge and comprehension needed by a dermatologist. And what you can see from the early, I'll just kind of focus at the bottom here. These are the pass rates of the February and July modules for each of the modules given. And you can see it's slightly lower pass rates than the traditional certifying exam, but that's not surprising because we have some second-year residents taking some of these modules, and maybe they're not quite ready with their medical knowledge, fully developed in their medical knowledge at the end of their second year. They have 3 more opportunities to do well. And this is just the spread on the med derm, peds derm, et cetera exam. So you can see it's not perfectly bell-shaped, but certainly somewhat bell-shaped in performance. Why did the ABD create the additional final test in this applied exam? If I told you it's the same as the cert exam, the core exam is, why do we have the applied exam? And that's because as a group, we really felt that we needed something that was a practical, real-world patient care and problem-solving element, because it was missing in the current certifying exam. We had people that were very high core knowledge scoring people that weren't always the best dermatologists clinically. And so this was supposed to be the practical dermatology exam. How do you think through a problem? How do you think with incomplete information? How do you think in imperfect scenarios? How do you think about patient-centered care over sometimes trumping evidence-based care? This hasn't been given yet. We've had sprinklings of it on the last several certifying exams just to validate some questions, but the first applied exam will be administered in 2021. The final thing before questions if there are time is the residency program assessment movement. The ACGME went through a next accreditation system movement, and self-assessment of the program was really a part of that. And so continuous improvement for me was also a very exciting thing, where you're looking at, you know, a variety of inputs of data. Now, if you don't currently pay attention to your resident and faculty survey, you really should as a program, because that's a very important part of it. But also, how do your residents perform in their competencies? Are there any dips or valleys that you need to really stress? We need to get this earlier into the program or whatever. There needs to be some kind of faculty evaluation that's objective. And we have a very exciting faculty evaluation radar plot that I think gives very good information to our faculty in a weighted fashion. But the thing I want to finish with is a very easy tool that I think has been transformational in the last 10 years in our program, and that's the program Top Strengths and Weaknesses Index. And we ask 6 simple questions to residents and faculty. We ask, what's the program's greatest area for improvement, the second greatest area for improvement, the third greatest area for improvement, and we give them a point value. And then we ask, what's the best part about this program, the second best, the third best part of this program? And we measure those things and we track it over time. And we make what's called this index. And we really focus on the right-hand negative side of this curve. That becomes our marching orders. And what we do is we take a resident score and we take a faculty score and we add those two together to get the program score. And it's all normalized on a 0 to 6 point scale. And it's been very, very good to identify problems. And not only that, to identify problems, but how are you doing in trying to solve those problems over time? This is an example of what I'm talking about. So the blue line was the original 2019 cruise index. And then we put together, the program evaluation committee puts a plan in place to fix things. And then we measure, how did we score on the next year's cruise index and all of those things. And you can see that for most things that were negative, we actually did pretty well. And we plot that over here in a delta plot, and green is good and red is bad. And we can look at those two dips that we had where things actually got worse. Things actually got worse in 2 of the areas. So clearly those plans didn't work, or something else happened in the meantime that made things worse. But it gives you an opportunity as a group to measure and to say, what can we do? Let's plan of action to attack each of our negatives in this residency program. And then we'll see next year, how did we do? And it's not meant to have never anything to work on. With this index, you'll always have something to work on. There's always going to be something in the top, second, and third place, most negative things. And those, to me, are the things that a program ought to be working at. And you as a program ought to be holding the program director accountable for change. It's not just about identifying the problem. It's being able to show the next year, hey, we did good. Our plan worked, except for these 2 things, and we need to really work on that. So that's the evolution of my career, and you can see that my journey really hit in a major, major time of major change for both resident education and certifying education. And I leave now with the American Board of Dermatology this year, 8 years later, been one of the most satisfying pieces of my career. Because of this named lectureship, and I thought Dr. O'Grady would appreciate this, I do want to leave you with a teaching point, and it's one of my favorite quotes. And it's the biggest lesson that I learned the hard way during all of this, and wish you could do over knowing what I know now. And it comes from the Coca-Cola, former CEO of Coca-Cola. Imagine life as a game in which you're juggling 5 balls in the air. You name them work, family, health, friends, and spirit. And you're keeping all of these in the air. You will soon understand that work is a rubber ball. If you drop it, it will bounce back. But the other 4 balls, family, health, friends, and spirit are made of glass. If you drop one of these, they will be irrevocably scuffed, marked, nicked, damaged, or even shattered. They will never be the same. You must understand that and strive for balance in your life. I will say that during some of those busiest times, it was so intoxicating to be riding the tiger tail of change that I scuffed up many of my balls. And I would say, you know, try your best to find balance. In my life now, for those that don't know me, I'm a high school football coach. This is a different era because none of us have masks on. But that's how I find my balance now, is coaching high school football on the side. And I'll just show you, while I wish we could be together in San Diego, this was my practice on Tuesday. This is my surfboard. And I want to thank you very much for having me for the O'Grady Lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. That I hadn't heard that quote before, and I like that one. That'll stick with me. All right, we have some questions before the resident lecture. So I'll start by bringing up some of the ones in the chat, and then if anybody else has questions, feel free to unmute and introduce yourself as well. So Dr. Romero asked a question, is the QI component included in the annual MOC fee? Is it available under the Medical Board of Derm website?
Yes, it is. It's available. If you go to abderm.org, it's free. And I would just encourage everybody, I would never pay for another MOC activity again, if you can help it, unless you really, really want to do it. You don't need to do that. You can get everything free. With your AAD membership, which I think 98% of dermatologists have anyway, or through many of your JAMA Dermatology or JAD subscriptions or other of those journals. And then the ABD supplies a large number of those as well. But you can get to the Focus Practice Improvement portal through the AB Derm website.
Great. And Dr. Bob Scheinberg was asking about faculty evaluations, and is there a list of skills that each member of the faculty should transmit, and mentoring of faculty if weaknesses are found to allow the residents to reach those milestones?
Well, I think it's important that every residency is a little bit different about what they want out of a faculty member in the residency program. And I'm happy to share any tool that I've ever made on this. What we value may be a little bit different from place to place to place, but I think it really starts with what does the residency program want, and really starting with the ACGME program requirements. Have a list, an actual list of what are we looking for out of each faculty member. And so I would start with those attributes and go from there with your local importance.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Gallo.
Thanks, Tara. I just wanted to say, Erik, thank you very much. That was really a fantastic history, and really your passion and energy and work ethic really comes through in your presentation. I think all of us who have done, board exams and seen the progress in this and been involved in all the controversy appreciate all of the hard work and how hard it has been for the ABD to try to satisfy the diverse interests of the dermatology community. And I guess I wanted to ask you a question kind of from your perspective as a football coach.
Yeah.
And a lot, our certification, or a lot of the data, I guess, that drives much of the decisions often seem to be on self-assessment or how well you perceive the effectiveness of the tool, rather than if you scored a touchdown or not. If there's an independent assessment of skill that's not based on, well, I like to take this test, it's hard, it's easy. And I guess it's not a new question, but what are your thoughts about having something that stands apart from people's opinions on on what a good dermatologist is or should be?
Yeah, I think so there's clear evidence that self-assessment is one of the worst or the least valid tools that there is for measuring performance. I do think that what will be necessary and what a lot of health centers and health systems are now turning to are more of outcomes measures, you know, and I think that our field will be very benefited by having more outcomes measures where it's not even going further than process measures, you know, like process measures are where almost everything is right now in dermatology. We need to go to the outcomes measures and say, well, yeah, it's great that you you know, referred the patient for their blood pressure, but is their blood pressure any better, you know, and if 5 years from now it's not. But what we need is like, okay, melanoma outcomes or quality of life indices, you know, those are the kinds of things that I think will be, you know, for the next guy or gal that gets into the American Board of Dermatology to kind of wrestle with, you know, how do we get our arms around those kind of index? Because I agree with you. I think that that's desired. It doesn't really exist in a widespread way to be able to just implement. But if I had to encourage anybody in a career in research right now, you know, it would be sort of that kind of pathway of how do you get better outcomes measures in dermatology.
Thank you.
There's actually a lot of great stuff in high school football coaching for that's very relevant to derm education. I've actually tried to get so we film everything. I mean, we film everything, and there's this national group called Huddle that every high school in America uses, or 90+% they have the market share where you film everything and they instantly break it down through artificial intelligence. And I've approached them to say, you know, if we like hooked up some cameras to a derm resident doing, you know, a GoPro or something during surgery, you know, and have the same kind of artificial intelligence to kind of go through their, you know, the way that they operate or their kinesthetics or whatever, their efficiency, it's there. We just haven't tapped it yet.
Are there any other questions in our last few minutes? Dr. Metterly, in the meantime, had asked in the chat if there's support, education, or training provided to program directors and academic faculty so that they can provide feedback to residents.
Yeah, actually, I would encourage the people interested in that. There is a section on the ACGME website, and it's got a one-word buzz, and I can't remember what that is, so it's not very buzzy, I guess. But that has a whole list of modules and training videos and things on how to give negative feedback or corrective feedback, and how to have difficult conversations with learners or faculty or whatever. It's valuable, and it's fairly universal. You know, it's not necessarily dermatology specific, so it's good for a lot of different kinds of faculty and resident interactions. And so I'd encourage you to explore. And Tara, I've got your email. I can send you that link, because I was just talking about that the other day and got the link, so I can share that with you.
That would be great. Thank you. In our last minute, any other questions from the group? Well, thank you, Erik. That was a fantastic talk. And so we will be transitioning now to the resident lecture. So all Navy and UCSD residents, please stay on. Maybe for a moment we can put up, is there a QR code? But all the UCSD and Navy residents, please stay on. And then everyone else, if you can, after you grab the QR code, exit. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Erik.
My pleasure. So I'll maybe give a minute to transition, and then we'll just hit it.